Well, hello again, everybody. This is John Norris at Trading Perspectives. As always, we have our very good friend, Sam Clement. Sam, say hello.
Hey, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for asking. I hope you're doing well here today on a chilly day in central Alabama.
Yeah, it's getting a little warmer and there seems to be no more ice on the road, so it's always good.
It's always good. Well, guys, you might remember last week we did a review of our new normal series from last year here at Oakworth Capital Bank. In the first section, we focused on some of the predictions we made for society, things like what's the status of movie theaters and what's going on with professional sports and so on and so forth, stuff like that. And I think we got most of them pretty right, pretty right. I think we might have given ourselves a B on our predictions. So that was our first segment. And so the second segment of a review of our new normal series from last year is something you wrote, it's actually entitled it Workforce Reset. And I think the three big predictions that you made in Workforce Reset are, if you don't mind me reading them for you. First one is employers will realize more jobs can be remote than they had previously considered. 2, this will cause demand for physical office space to decrease. And 3, more employees will demand the ability to work remotely.
I mean, I feel pretty good about them. I mean, I think these were all kind of long-term trends and things we were expecting long-term. And those are more long-term predictions, I guess. But I mean, so far, I think we're already seeing the fruition of that. And really the gist of my predictions were, we were already kind of seeing this, and we've talked so much about how we were seeing these trends that are just being expedited. They were already in place, and it's kind of coincidental, what the pandemic is causing, the trends that were already in place and what a pandemic would cause us to do were the same things, that those trends that were already in place before. So we're just seeing everything being expedited. And I think we're definitely seeing that. And it's been a big talking point amongst, commercial real estate and employers. And so, I mean, so far I feel pretty good about these.
Yeah, I feel pretty good about them too. And I think you really kind of nailed them. And something that you just said, you said a couple of times really, that the pandemic or COVID-19 really in a lot of ways just has expedited the inevitable, not just in workforce reset, but really what was going on and some of the things that we covered last week in terms of societal, the streaming technology being a hindrance to movie theater ticket sales, that sort of thing. I mean, we were already seeing this type of stuff happen, and we were already seeing more and more people working remotely. So I think we nailed all three of them, but we got to ask ourselves, while we're seeing all this, do you think this workforce reset, working remotely, is it going to be as huge a chunk of the American workforce as perhaps some people are saying that it's going to be? And that's really maybe a new prediction of ours.
I would probably lean towards no, it's not going to be a full remote environment, and my thought for that is I've seen some of these CEOs of companies that you would think would be extremely pro working remote. This Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, I mean, he's been maybe the biggest benefactor of people being at home constantly. And he is someone who is pretty adamantly against full-time remote working for the whole staff. And then the other one is the CEO of Peloton, who is also an extreme benefactor of working
enormous
remote.
benefactor.
I mean, if they may be the biggest because they wouldn't even be nearly as successful if it wasn't for the pandemic, or at least in my opinion. And so, and even he was saying, he likes working remote. He likes it for some people, but not for a full-time staff.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be probably the consistent theme. The reports of the demise of downtown office space might be a little bit exaggerated, but even so, we will probably see more people working remotely or some kind of hybrid where they're in the office 4 days out of the week and working remotely one day, something along those lines. And if you don't mind, I'm just going to read you a couple of, advantages and disadvantages of working remotely. And then we'll talk about what type of worker can actually work from home and what type can't, okay? So here are some advantages, at least according to Mazzitti and Sullivan. They do some work on employee relations. First off is reduce cost to the corporation. And so, that reduces potentially some brick and mortar office space. Increased productivity, they argue, as people are free from the disruptions associated with working in an office. Obviously, a decreased commute that saves money and time. More time people can spend working or doing other things. increased exposure to additional markets, and therefore giving you a larger hiring pool. Fair enough?
I think that's fair.
Yeah, I think it's fair. Some of the disadvantages, and I went to a website called directrecruiters.com. Disadvantages are the need for a high level of self-discipline in doing your work, right? I mean, that's,
Yeah. I mean, you
fall
don't
asleep on the couch.
You don't have people checking in on you, walking by your desk, and there is an extreme level of, self-responsibility you have to have if you're going to be working remote full time, and some level of accountability.
Well, and kind of along those lines, I mean, it's very difficult because our management style here at Oakworth Capital Bank is to ensure that all of our associates are put underneath the thumb. Just absolutely
keep your thumb on them.
Keep my thumb on them, nose to the grindstone, 100% of the time.
In fact, going by people's houses that are working remote and popping in on them.
And by the way, very nice window treatments. All right, so that's one of them. Then also the lack of a workforce social life. I guess the building of teamwork and camaraderie. I think that's a disadvantage. At least that's what these people thought. People can often get overlooked for promotions because they're working. They're working remotely. They don't have the day in and day out physical interaction. I'm not trying to be weird with that, but physical interaction with their supervisors or their bosses.
That's a big one.
Yeah.
I'll interrupt you real quick, just because I think that's a huge one that I think that is going unnoticed a little bit by people that aren't participating in that remote work. I've had friends that work for other companies that have said, I love working remote, but I can't really do it right now, or I don't want to do it right now until I get to a certain level within the company. They feel they can't get promoted as quickly when they're just sitting behind a screen, because there's more to getting promoted than just your actual productivity.
I think you're right about that. Actually, I know that you're right about that. It's generally, there are going to be greater career opportunities for people who their bosses like. I mean, truthfully.
Yeah.
And so if you're working remotely, the Zoom calls are fine and telephone calls and whatnot, but it's not the same interaction. Like, you and Sam, you and I have gone out and gotten Vietnamese food on any number of occasions. I mean, that just helps build a relationship and camaraderie. So I think you're right about that. And
it's hard to imagine if you hired someone full-time remote that you would ever develop the same kind of connection as a coworker that you would if you're in the office, you're going to lunch, you're in-person meetings and things like that. So I think that is one of the biggest hindrances to full-time remote work, because I don't think there's a way around that. I don't think there's a technological advancement that we can, take in place of those in-person connections.
Well, I think you're right. But then again, some jobs, and we'll go on this in just a second, some jobs, it's more the creativity and the output that's going to get you noticed. Sure. But I do agree with you on this. Another disadvantage is total dependency on technology. And I mean, take this recent bad winter weather. Think about those people out in Texas without any power.
Absolutely.
Those people working remotely, guess what? You can't do your job. If you don't have power and you don't have access to the internet, you can't get on the roads down to get to the office. So that is a disadvantage, I think. And then finally, you go ahead.
To me, that's lower on the totem pole of concerns with remote work, because I think that is a good example. Texas, what's going on with the storm there. They're probably not going into the office anyway. And so I think there's some benefit to being able to do some of those jobs remote. If you are someone who, you're without power and the streets are down, hey, I actually can work remote. And so I think that there's two sides to that coin.
Well, you're probably right. And the last disadvantage these people said is there's blurred lines between work life and home life, blurring the work-life balance, because what happens if your home is also your office for everyone. I mean, it works for some people, don't get me wrong, but how do you divorce the two? And I'll tell you another one, the times that I have had to work remotely due to exposure to someone that's had COVID-19 and whatnot, and I know that you have as well. One of the problems is it is assumed by family members that because you're working from the house, that you are free to do all kinds of errands and are free to talk and handle problems and what have you. And oh, by the way, could you put this in the washing machine while you're at home? Or,
Yeah.
while you're out getting lunch, could you go by the grocery store? Well, if I'm working at home, I'm not
Sure.
going to well, obviously I'm complaining about my home life right here, but
But no,
I've spoken to
I
other
think you're
people.
spot on, and
Go ahead.
I think you're spot on. And then there's the other side of that, which is also an issue, doing home stuff while you're supposed to be working. And then there's also the problem of doing work stuff while you're supposed to not be working. There's a sense of ease to, once you leave the office that you're done with work, for a lot of people at least. And, if that's no longer the case, say you used to get off at 5:30, maybe it's like, hey, I have something else I need to do. I'm going to keep working. I may pull my computer up at 9 before bed, and it's a snowball effect. And both sides of that coin are both problematic to me, not being able to work when you're supposed to be working, and then working while you're not supposed to be working. So that is I think that's a long-term kind of fear and problem that is going to play out over decades.
Yeah, well, I think you're right about that. Now, shifting gears a little bit, going to a study that McKinsey did towards the end of last year, talking about what kind of jobs can be remote, what percentage of the workforce can actually do it. And they said that really only about 22%, believe it or not, 22% of jobs in the American economy can be remote 3 business days or more per week. And most of these are really in sort of like jobs that we have, updating knowledge and learning, interacting with computers, thinking creativity, sort of your creative and really your knowledge-based jobs can be remote. However, things like assisting and caring for others, measuring products or surroundings, working with equipment, materials, and machinery, handling and moving objects, distribution, just in general, warehousing, all that stuff, a good chunk of jobs. Yeah, you might be able to work a day or two periodically remotely on some of these if you have to. But in terms of being full-time remote, I don't think that there are as many jobs out there that are truly as full-time remote as perhaps maybe we initially feared or what have you.
Yeah, I mean, and 22% probably sounds about right to me. There's manual labor type jobs, and then jobs that require any sort of physicality to them, whether it's a doctor, a surgeon, a nurse, someone sticking a needle in you, or fixing a pipe, or tearing a wall down. Like there's there's a lot of 22% probably sounds about right, and most of that's more in the probably law, investments, finance, banking, things like that. But then even banking, people have to go deposit cash. Someone's got to be there. So, every industry probably has subsectors of that industry that can't work remote, even if the majority of that industry can.
Well, the thing is, and then we run into a can be remote full-time and should be remote full-time, and even want to work remote full-time. Now, I could probably do my job remote full-time all the time, and you could too, probably could. However, do I want to do that?
Yeah.
And the truth is, no, not really. I like the discipline of coming into the office to put some structure on my life. I think interpersonal meetings with clients and prospects are more effective than Zoom calls. I think interpersonal relationships in the office are necessary to build esprit de corps and, kind of a gung-ho type of atmosphere. We're all moving in the right direction. With that said, it's very nice to know that I can work remote if I have to, like, recent weather conditions, or if, God forbid, I get sick or something along those lines. I think it's wonderful. However, it's not necessarily something I want to do, and that's personal, but it is something I can do if I need to do so.
And I think a good kind of anecdote that I've seen for that, and the wanting to versus, and you mentioned the efficacy of client meetings in person versus over Zoom. I've heard a lot of people joke that client meetings are a lot shorter over Zoom than they are in person, and maybe that's a good thing sometimes, but a lot of times what you're missing out on is that same interpersonal connection, and that 15 minutes of kind of intro, and a lot of these people become friends, and it's more than just a business transaction. And what you get a lot of times when you go to just Zoom is, okay, meeting starts at 10, let's get to it, we got to be done by 11. So that's a fear. There's a lot of kind of concerns.
Well, you're right about that. Yesterday, I had a Zoom meeting with a client to discuss the 2020 performance, which was quite good, both in absolute and relative terms. I don't mind bragging on the moves that we made last year at Oakwood Capital Bank, but it's supposed to start at 10:30, and we were over with by 10 minutes of 11. Because the Zoom meeting, from rightly or wrongly, doesn't lend itself to a lot of sort of discussion about how you doing, how are the kids, and just sort of back and forth. It's a little bit harder to interrupt people, or it just doesn't engender it for whatever reason. So, while we blocked off an hour and everyone's very happy and everyone's very personable and all that stuff, there's time to go. Whereas I've done the same meeting with that same group in person, and it takes a full hour.
Absolutely. Yep.
And so I would say that this is kind of, you can work remote or should work remote. That's a real question that American businesses are going to be asking themselves moving forward. And we're asking that of ourselves here at Oakwood Capital Bank. What jobs need to actually be remote or can be remote, and what jobs need to be here? Now, understanding that virtually everyone can now has capability to work remotely. Is it in the company's best interest? Is it in the associate's best interest to work on-site or remote? And when we go through the spreadsheet and go through all of our associates and the roles and whatnot, we're finding it's really in everyone's best interest, in our estimation, to have people on-site. It's overall better for the client experience. It's overall better for the associate experience. It fosters greater teamwork, greater culture. It's not to say that people who work remote can't get all that stuff. It's just by the time we kind of put the paper to pen or pen to paper, sharpen the pencil, we just came up with not really a huge chunk, a sizable percentage of our workforce is going to be full-time remote moving forward, although they can.
And yeah, no, I think you're spot on. And I think there's kind of one last point that I hit on that I think would be worth mentioning here. And that was kind of my third main point. And I think a sub point of that was that there's going to be increased supply and increased demand really throughout the economy for workers. So, because say right now, I'm looking for a job in Birmingham. I have a few employers, but say I can now apply to jobs everywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. That increases not only my supply, the amount of jobs I can apply for, but on the other side, all those companies can look for employees all across the country. And so what that does is it puts supply where there's demand for it. And I think that is an overall benefit for the economy and for the country's economy, is that jobs are going to go where they need to go. Salaries may increase. People don't necessarily need to live right in the city suburbs to work a job downtown. They can be in Omaha and work a job in Dallas. And what that does is it puts talent where talent needs to be and increases, efficacy in the market. So I think that's something that I am excited for, is people are allowed to go where they deem the best fit for them and not necessarily where they bought their house.
All right, Sam, I know you're trying to make a point, but don't even joke about looking for another job. All right. That's I don't want to hear that out of you. It's just way too important to us. One last thing I want to talk about, and then we'll kind of tidy it up here at the end, is, Sam, all this being said, I do think that perhaps the reports of the demise of the downtown business district might be a little overstated. However, people are turning and taking and saying, look at all these for apartments for rent in downtown New York. Take a look at what's happening with the people leaving San Francisco, all that stuff. And I would point to, think of all the people moving to Nashville. Think of all the people moving to Austin. Think about all these businesses. I'm not saying this has been great for those businesses. I would say, however, that this remote work situation is going to be more of a headwind or more problematic for those cities which have high taxes and bad economic policies. Truthfully, are people leaving New York because of being able to work remotely, or are they leaving because Mayor de Blasio has ineffectively governed that city?
Yeah.
Are people leaving San Francisco because they can work remotely, or because the city council over there has turned it into, I don't know. From what I've read, the reports are horrible with the homeless situation and some of the things that are going on, like now with the school board. Understanding that the company's headquarters in San Francisco, they've known all along they can work remotely. as much as they want. So I don't think it has really as much.
Yeah, and it's definitely a tricky subject to look at, because you can't, like you said, you can't just look at sheer numbers of people entering and exiting the city, because there is lots of reasons that people would want to leave certain cities. And, this may be the last kind of straw that allows them to, but it's hard to probably break apart who's leaving just because of cheaper living and they can work remote versus people saying, I gotta get out of here.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point. But yeah, I don't think the demise, I think Nashville is a great example. That city is absolutely booming. And it makes sense that some people may want to leave, Palo Alto or New York, and Miami's kind of becoming a big hub for some finance and tech companies as well. So yeah, it's a multifaceted issue.
Yeah, and not just working remotely. That technology's been there for a lot of folks already. Well, listen, I hope that some of these major cities do stem the tide. I love visiting New York. I love visiting San Francisco. Just lots to see and do, and like the restaurants and all that stuff. So, in any event, well, Sam, I think we've done a pretty good job reviewing section 2 of our new normal series from last year. And I think maybe the jury's still out a little bit in terms of just how many people will work remotely. However, your contention that businesses are going to think about remote work more, and that employees are going to want a greater flexibility and want to work remotely more, and that the demand for office space may or may not will decline in general, because even if it is only 10%, they say McKinsey's saying 22% can be full-time remote, and let's say half of those end up being full-time remote, even a 10% decrease in office space could have detrimental impact on some of our population centers. Fair enough?
Yeah. So I'm going to give myself an A. I don't know what you give me, but I'll give myself an A on this one.
Fair enough. I graded myself a little bit harshly. I think I gave myself a B. I'll give you an A on this one, Sam. That's an early wedding present. How about that?
I like it.
All right.
I like it.
Well, guys, thank you all so much for listening. As always, we love to hear from you. Also, if you have any comments or questions, please, by all means, drop us a line at tradingperspectives@oakworth.com. If you want to hear more, read more of what we have to say or think or how we think, by all means, go to oakworth.com and check underneath the Thought Leadership tab for all kinds of interesting articles and all sorts of information. Sam, I'm going to give you a last chance like I always do.
That's all I got.
That's all I've got today, too. Y'all take care.